Следующий докладчик — это Роб Kurver, управляющий партнер консалтинговых компаний Ideology и White Rabbit. Роб расскажет о трендах UCS и CPaaS в Европе, о новых участниках этого рынка, о вызовах этого рынка и, главное, о возможностях. Поприветствуем.
Thank you. I didn't understand a word of that, but I think it's about me. Great to be here, great to be in Russia, my first time. I'm not with the White Rabbit, the restaurant, but I hope to visit soon. My background is in hosted voice, cloud communications. I was one of the first pioneers in hosted voice 15 years ago when it just sort of started. And these last couple of years, I'm focusing on CPaaS and UCaaS and market developments, doing a lot of research, strategy consulting for telcos and all of that. So I'm here to spend 15 minutes talking about that and our vision as Appiology on this exciting industry. I don't know how many of you saw the keynote of Jeff Lawson a couple of weeks ago, Twilio. He introduced, I think, a great concept. He basically says the next decade is going to be not about websites, not about apps, but about conversations. A whole new era. And we're part of that. And I think we've seen also this morning earlier some figures, right? This market is booming, it's growing. Mark Winter of IDC talked about that. We're looking at a 11 billion market now. It's growing to much bigger. Mark mentioned 39% yearly growth. Gartner is saying in 2023, that's 4 years from now basically, 50% of companies are using CPaaS, some form or another. So this is an exciting space to be in, and it has a lot of opportunities. It also has a few challenges. Going back a little bit, I'm from Holland, I'm from Amsterdam, and I was one of the first pioneers in hosted voice. And when we started, the hosted voice penetration in the Netherlands was essentially 0. We didn't even have the word hosted voice 15 years ago. We started out by calling it on-demand PBX. Nobody knew what we were talking about. This was before people accepted cloud as something normal and natural. 15 years later, what we see in the Netherlands is we have about almost 50% penetration of hosted voice. Almost 50% of the seats of the users in the Netherlands are using some form of cloud communications. And it's still growing nicely. It depends a little bit, small companies, large companies, and there's a lot of differences there. But Netherlands in Europe is leading the pack in terms of penetration. We're ahead of the UK, certainly ahead of Germany and France. Nice little small country, densely populated. We have great infrastructure, both wireless and wired. It all helped to get this thing accepted. So it's normal. And CPaaS is following this. If you look at the technology adoption curve, which I love, there's this concept of a chasm, right? New technologies get introduced, and at some point, it needs to cross the chasm. And I think this is essential to understand when we talk about CPaaS and about the state of this industry. The last couple of years, we've seen digital natives embrace CPaaS 1.0, as I like to call it, SMS and voice. Mark also touched on that this morning. 90% of the business of CPaaS is traditional, old-style business. It's a replacement, just easier to access. Adopted by digital natives, using companies that are new in the industry. It's all very new. Nothing to lose. Great. As we're moving across the chasm for CPaaS, what we're seeing is that two changes. Different kinds of companies are starting to use it. What we like to call agile enterprises. These are more traditional companies, more old-fashioned, if you will. Larger companies, airlines, banks maybe, not only Booking.com or Airbnb or Uber. regular companies. And also we're looking at different kinds of solutions, not just SMS and voice, but things related to customer experience, contact centers, teams in all shapes and forms, value-added services, speech, recognition, translation, these sort of things. And as we've heard a lot about today, it's moving towards what I like to call 3.0 AI. It's all about intelligence, augmented intelligence, that's the future. And the big change here is, when you look at the marketing and sales of these solutions, it's changing from a product push to let's say, a market pull. We're selling not so much, or not only to the developers based on product specs anymore, but now we need to appeal to business users in this industry. We need to talk about use cases. Again, Mark had some good examples this morning, which requires a totally different way of working, which is exactly what, of course, Crossing the Chasm is all about. It's about reinventing your company to go to work, to sell, to interact with the early majority, rather than the innovators and the early adopters. And this creates interesting opportunities, but also some challenges for the players in this industry. The battle right now is all about the Agile enterprise. These are the companies that have something to lose when they adopt these new technologies, not only to gain. If you look the last couple of years, there's been a lot of consolidation in the, let's say, CPaaS 1.0 market. Companies like Cisco buying Tropo, VoIP Innovations buying Epidays, Bix bought Telesign a couple of years ago, West and 8x8 both acquired recently a CPaaS platform. It seems that all the larger UCaaS players are now looking for a CPaaS, a CPaaS. We need a CPaaS as part of the portfolio. Not sure exactly what CPaaS means, but we need a CPaaS. And at the same time, we see some players getting a lot of money. MessageBird, a Dutch company, a startup with maybe 60 people a few years ago. They got, I don't know, Series A of 60 million, growing to 400 people now in 1 or 2 years. Bandwidth, something similar a year ago. And what's interesting to see is telcos are starting to get into the game. KPN developed their API store over the last 2 years. KPN is the Dutch incumbent telco in the Netherlands. I worked on that project for 2 years for them. AT&T launched their API marketplace in April or something of this year, based on technology by Ribbon, and catering to their, let's say, their business users with a story. We have CPaaS, and we have it in a telco fashion. And just a few weeks ago, we saw Sangoma acquire Epidays and VoIP, the Epidays VoIP Innovations combination. Sangoma, of course, home of Asterisk now. So we see a lot of consolidation. We see UCaaS players get into the market, but we also see new players working in partnership to get into this market. And we think there's a huge opportunity for communication service providers, telcos, carriers, mobile operators, all these guys, to monetize their assets through CPaaS, to move up in the value stack, to reduce their churn, get closer to their customers, and sell basically more core services. So it's a defensive move, more than anything else, but still an important move. And it's an interesting channel for a lot of these CPaaS platforms. So we see companies like Telestax, Wazo, Goma, Ribbon, really focus on this. Gartner seems to also think that this is a very important development, and a lot of telcos are gearing up to do this. They have the customer intimacy, and CPaaS is not really that hard to add to the portfolio. So the example I'm personally very familiar with, the KPN API store. Started as an API store with a range of products, but really a lot of that is about CPaaS. And the value proposition there is very simple. It's reliability and trust and governance, compliance, much more than the technical products that are in the store. What KPN is selling to their corporate customers is the brand. It's, we're a telco, you can trust us. Same as AT&T are doing. You don't necessarily need to compete with having the best SMS API or whatever. It's about being the most trusted partner for these large enterprises and being able to do business with them. One of the KPN early customers was KLM, the Dutch Royal Airline. And it was very simple for KLM. They'd been doing the development work with Twilio. Then when they needed to move it into production, legal, purchasing, security, all these departments started to bill. They didn't want to deal with Twilio, with an American company that couldn't give guarantees or couldn't protect the data necessarily, didn't really know what GDPR was all about, privacy, whereas KPN could step in there and fulfill those needs. I don't think many telcos are necessarily the best at developing the APIs or the API store or the platform or the CPaaS, but they're a great channel to market. The AT&T marketplace, very similar. They have the APIs. In their case, they decided to go with Ribbon, and they offer not just the APIs, the SMS, your voice, whatever, video, but also turnkey solutions, recognizing that their typical corporate customers need more than just the building blocks in many cases. They need something that already works, or that's 95% close to completion. What we saw earlier today in Alexi's presentation, for example, the low-code or no-code developments and new offerings are crucial, because at the end, the Agile enterprise, in many cases, doesn't have developers to actually build the solutions that they think they need from these components. They need support from that. First, by making it more simple to use, and secondly, also simply professional services. So we believe that we're at the start of a huge growth of professional services integrator companies in this space. And similar to this, a nice example, Rakuten, Japanese version of Amazon, I guess. I mean, a big IT player there, digital player, adopted Rapid API platform and rebranded it to offer APIs to their customers. And the Rapid API platform is interesting because it has more than 10,000 APIs of all forms and shapes, including a bunch of CPaaS. And they have the same story to their enterprise customers. Come and shop with us. You get it in one place. We'll give you some assurance about the quality. We'll promise that APIs will stay available for a certain amount of time, which is an issue. And we're starting to deal with this issue of governance, because with more and more APIs being used by large companies, it's important that the API industry, the CPaaS industry, starts to deliver more assurances, build the trust, guarantee service levels, guarantee availability for a longer period of time. The globalization is an issue because it needs to run everywhere for these big companies. Best effort, in many cases, is not enough anymore. And it all has to do with digital transformation, right, for these large companies. The last 1 or 2 decades, we went through digitization, just turning things from analog to digital, then digitalization, putting it basically in the cloud, different deployment model, but still the same service, the same stuff. Hosted voice, or UCaaS, is essentially still the same thing as the PBX that you could buy 20 years ago, just in a different model, different deployment. And the interesting thing of digital transformation is now finally businesses can reinvent themselves, and that's key to survival for them. So In the communications industry, we see the IP PBX, the UCaaS phase, the last 10 years maybe, UCaaS, and now it's all about CPaaS and artificial intelligence going forward. This is what's just starting, or what we're in the middle of, you could say, but I think for many companies it's just starting. And it's a mindset. Digital transformation is not a project, it's not a process, it's a totally different way for these large companies to reinvent themselves. The thing is, large companies have legacy. It's not going to be changed overnight. So we're looking at a very complex situation with legacy platforms, legacy solutions being combined with new bits and pieces delivered through APIs, CPaaS being added. This is going to take some time before this is all done. And it needs to be reliable, it needs to be trusted, it needs to be, data needs to be secured, there's privacy, there's all these issues, very complicated stuff. And in this transformation, or this road to transformation, the discussion changes. It's no longer mostly about technology. The technology is becoming a hygiene factor. It needs to work, it needs to be reliable, but it's really about business. It's about what you can do with this stuff. It's about use cases. The buyers of the digital transformation, or the stakeholders in digital transformation, are in many cases, they're not so technical. They're business. They need to change their business. They have different things on their minds than the best technology. Going back to CPaaS, this is a slide from a survey done by Ribbon and Polly this year, asking enterprises about very simple CPaaS features. And what's interesting to see is that many companies hardly use any of these solutions that are available at all. Click simple solutions on the website, click to call, click to chat, video call. 76% of the companies maybe use one of those. So there's a huge potential there for regular companies to adopt all these new technologies. They just need some help with that. So I think there's a challenge there for both the technology providers and for their, let's say, integrators, channel partners, the sellers, to get the right message out and to provide the right solutions. And this is a big change. Sales, basically, of these technologies is changing. From a, let's say, technology push, it becomes more an ecosystem play. With marketing, online and offline marketing, events, everything, and then the whole process of proof of concepts, projects, and customer success management. And this is a big challenge, I'd say, for the more traditional channels to get their head, to wrap their head around. It requires new skill sets, it requires a different way of interacting, which is totally logical for, let's say, digital natives and companies and people that were born in the SaaS economy. But in the more traditional channels that we talked about, the telcos, this is a big challenge. So they need help with that as well, and that's also something that we're working on at Appiology. So summarizing, what we see is CPaaS 2.0 is becoming normal. Everybody needs it. It's becoming part of the set. It's going global, which is an important change for some of the providers. Agile enterprises are looking for support. They're looking for help with governance. They're looking for reliability, and they need a different way to be sold to. And it's all about the mindset, continuous change. No matter what the solution is, no matter what the challenge is or the platform is that they want to modernize, it's going to take some time. And it's all about digital transformation. We're crossing the chasm with CPaaS. It's about hybrid solutions the next years, augmenting the existing IT and telco platforms, both in customer experience and employee experience, things like Teams, which requires a lot of integration in professional services. So there's a huge industry opportunity here, we think, for the next 10 years. So we have enough to do. Thank you.
Rob Kurver из White Rabbit и Apology.